Vietnam, the day the myth fell. The story you are about to hear is not just about a war. It is about the collapse of a certainty. In the early 1960s, the United States of America was not merely a nation. It was a force of nature. It had defeated fascism in Europe, mastered the atom, and built the greatest economic power of the modern era. Inside the Pentagon, efficiency was a doctrine. Generals believed that any problem on Earth could be solved with numbers, steel, and air power. The American soldier was seen as the hero of the century. Well-fed, equipped with the most advanced technology available, and backed by helicopters that made the sky itself tremble. On the other side stood Vietnam, a narrow strip of humid land covered by dense jungles, flooded rice paddies, and mist-covered mountains. Its fighters were thin men and women, often wearing sandals made from old tires, armed with aging rifles and sustained by handfuls of dry rice. On paper, this was not a war. It was supposed to be an execution. But Washington's calculations ignored one factor that never appears in charts or statistics: the absolute will of a people determined never to be ruled again. That was how the myth of American invincibility began to crack. To understand how the United States lost, it is essential to understand how it believed it would win. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson authorized Operation Rolling Thunder. The logic was brutally simple: bomb North Vietnam until it was forced to surrender. More bombs were dropped on Vietnam than in the entirety of World War II. The skies over Hanoi darkened with the contrails of B-52 bombers, the ultimate symbol of American strategic supremacy. Faith in technology was absolute. Electronic sensors were scattered through the jungle to detect human movement. Chemical defoliants like Agent Orange were sprayed to strip the land bare and deny the enemy cover. Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense and a devoted believer in statistics, was convinced that if the numbers were properly analyzed, victory was inevitable. The United States was fighting a war of spreadsheets. The Viet Cong were fighting for survival. The American soldier arrived believing he was unbeatable. He carried the M16 rifle, relied on artillery, capable of leveling entire areas in minutes, and trusted the Huey helicopter, the modern chariot that could insert troops deep into enemy territory and extract them just as quickly. But the jungle did not respect technology. Humidity jammed weapons, heat drained strength, and the enemy simply did not appear. Invisible, patient, lethal. Imagine being a young man sent from rural America into a forest where you cannot see more than a few feet ahead. A branch snaps, a shot echoes. No target is visible. The Viet Cong were not chasing spectacular victories. They were pursuing exhaustion. They struck for seconds and vanished. Where did they go? Underground. The Cu Chi tunnels became the ultimate symbol of Vietnamese ingenuity. While Americans dominated the skies, the Vietnamese mastered the ground beneath them. Entire underground cities operated below the enemy's boots: hospitals, factories, kitchens, sleeping quarters. The tunnels were too narrow for most American bodies and filled with traps: snakes, bamboo spikes, silent explosives, designed to terrify as much as to kill. These traps were more than physical weapons. They were psychological instruments. Poisoned bamboo stakes often did not kill instantly. They maimed. And a wounded soldier cost the war machine more than a dead one. He required men, helicopters, time. The price of the war rose in dollars and insanity. Every patrol that returned without ever seeing the enemy, but with men dead or mutilated, deepened the fracture in the myth of invincibility. By 1968, American command insisted that victory was near. Officials spoke of a light at the end of the tunnel. Then came Tet. During the Lunar New Year holiday, more than 80,000 North Vietnamese troops and guerrillas launched coordinated attacks on over 100 cities across South Vietnam. Even the US embassy in Saigon was breached. Militarily, American forces responded and eventually regained control. But the war had already been lost on another battlefield. Live television broadcasts showed the world that the enemy could strike anywhere, at any time. The shock was devastating. General Westmoreland requested more troops, a silent admission that the strategy had failed. If the most powerful nation on Earth needed 500,000 soldiers and still could not secure itself, invincibility was nothing more than an illusion. From that moment on, the collapse was moral. The US government attempted to transfer the war to South Vietnamese forces while withdrawing its own troops. Morale plummeted. Reports of massacres against civilians surfaced. Drug use spread among soldiers. Officers were killed by their own men to avoid suicidal missions. At home, protests ignited streets and universities. The myth crumbled both on the battlefield and in Washington. North Vietnam understood that time was its greatest weapon. General Vo Nguyen Giap summarized the conflict with brutal clarity. "You will kill many of us, but you will tire first." He was right. The end became history. In 1975, American helicopters evacuated Saigon from rooftops as North Vietnamese tanks smashed through the gates of the presidential palace. Aircraft were pushed into the sea to make room on aircraft carriers. This was not a planned withdrawal. It was a flight. The giant had fallen. Vietnam was not just a military defeat for the United States. It was a universal lesson. Bombs can destroy bridges, but they cannot break the determination of a people. The war proved that technology and industrial power cannot replace identity, purpose, and resistance. The myth of invincibility collapsed, leaving behind an uncomfortable truth. No nation is powerful enough to defeat the will of a people fighting simply to exist.